Okay, we'll give people a few minutes here to just get signed on. But welcome to the Innovate Pasadena Ask Me Anything with Robbie Nock. Thanks for joining us. See, a few more people are popping in here.
Thanks, Beth. A pleasure to be here.
So just do a brief introduction of you, but I just want to mention again, you are joining us for the Innovate Pasadena Ask Me Anything. It's a weekly series that we do here at Innovate Pasadena. Not weekly, sorry, bi-weekly, so every couple of weeks. And today we're joined by Robbie Nock, who's the Director of Entrepreneurship and Professional Practice at ArtCenter. So Robbie is here to be answering your design and entrepreneurship questions and perhaps giving us all a bit of insight into how your startup or business can leverage the power of design. So thank you so much, Robbie, for joining us.
Thank you, Beth. And great to see some familiar faces, or I guess familiar names in the attendee panel. I'm very pleased to be here. And I'm Director of Entrepreneurship and Professional Practice at ArtCenter and have spent my career working at the intersection of art, design, technology, business, and entrepreneurship. And in doing so, I've been able to work in a whole range of capacities as a studio founder, as a freelancer, as a startup founder, as a consultant, and now as an educator and entrepreneur in higher education space. And by wearing all of those hats over the years, I've been able to notice some real trends and patterns in both the opportunities for creative entrepreneurs, for designers and artists entering into the business space, and also some patterns of challenges that we encounter along the way. And so I really hope that this session is an opportunity to share some of what I know about that and answer any questions that you might have, high or low or in between. And of course, I don't know everything, but I always have some kind of response. So I'm excited for this to be interactive. There's a Q&A window for you to be able to use here on Zoom. So put your questions in there. And I think we had a few questions that were submitted already, which will kick us off. So, and I'll read them, the ones that were pre-submitted. So for designers who worked in an agency setting, what are a few things they should keep in mind when transitioning into entrepreneurs and that practice? And I think probably the most important thing in making the transition from being an employee to being an entrepreneur is that you're all of a sudden responsible for everything. So as an employee of an agency, even a small company, you have really a predetermined role that's based on a structure that somebody has hired you to fulfill. Now, that doesn't mean there's not huge opportunities for innovation and entrepreneurial activity as an employee, but you're really working more as an entrepreneur if you're bringing those to the table in that structure. As an entrepreneur, you are responsible for everything. You're responsible for your brand, your communications, your overhead, the cost of your space, the network that you bring to the table, the relationships that you have, the highs and lows, everything from taking the trash out at the end of the day to making sure that you're properly set up and structured as a business and dealing with your tax liabilities, and any other legal consequences that might be on the table. So I think anybody making that transition needs to be really eager to take on non-design activities, things that might not really look like design, though I'll share a little bit later about how some of those are actually very creative in their core when you're an entrepreneur. So that's just, to get us started, really the most important thing is expanding your willingness to take on challenges at an organizational level that are outside of what you might be trained in. And this holds true for engineers and even people coming from a business education. You can't just play one role. You really have to bring a nimble, multifunctional approach. So, and I think there was, Beth, there was one more, right? We had of a great, that's the one there. So how does being a design entrepreneur differ from a freelance designer or just being a designer? So I think that this question is interesting because it really focuses on the question around scale and what your design vision and entrepreneurial vision is really servicing. So at a freelance level, you're responsible for yourself and your brand of your organization and your relationship with clients. And typically those clients are going to be giving you projects, and those projects are really determined by the client, right? And you're competing with a whole community of freelancers who are looking to serve those clients and bring in that money to their business in order to pay their bills and grow and save money and so on and so forth, all the things that one does when one is a business owner. And that process becomes about relationships, it becomes about your network, it becomes about reaching out to new clients and finding bridges between existing clients and possible future clients. And it's a relationship-based approach. Now, when you maybe move away from the client work and into a role as a founder of a product or service or system, something that is scalable, something that is not just client facing, something that may have a much longer market, might be much more complex, might have much higher costs associated with it, you're really starting to prioritize your time in a very different way. And there's a lot of businesses that transition from a sort of freelance client approach to a scalable growth model, where they may have found some component of what they're doing for a client is actually serviceable to a whole range of other similar types of clients, and that if they focus on building that infrastructure, they may actually really be able to build a much more profitable or impactful business at the end of the day. And so that transition, and it's a similar transition to thinking about the first question, is all in your mindset around how you're prioritizing the activities that you do and the way you spend your time. And it may require more risk. It might require more of a R&D and internal development cycle to get your product or service or system ready to test. A lot of times there's a huge amount of complexity even before you're in stealth mode, even before you have a team or mentors, investors, any kind of seed or pre-seed funding. You're really setting that all up, and it's a different way that you spend your time. And I think one of the important lessons in the switch away from the client and into the scalable product, service, and systems approach is that you really have to keep track of your contribution to the value you're creating. So if you're developing some complex hardware that is costly and requiring a real manufacturing process, you're going to have to figure out your contribution relative to the goals of the company. So say you're the founder or co-founder of a new VR headset startup, right? Your time that you spend in developing early stage prototypes, in building out the team, in defining the legal structure, actually is creating the value of the company that you may go on to sell or to make public, or any of those lofty end results, comes down to really tracking and prioritizing your time. So hours that you spend are actually not just free, right? Even though you're not maybe paying yourself, you don't have a full budget or a full salary, but those hours are actually contributing to the value of what you're creating. And that thinking is what's going to help you attract investors and other team members. And it's also where the risk lies, because the more that you commit to unpaid, longer-term speculative work, the more risk you're taking on as the entrepreneur. And of course, that's a big part of the traditional entrepreneurship game, is risk and reward. And the risk ultimately plays out, down the line of series A, B, C, and D, and so on, as you develop that value. And there's more and more risk, the more and more investment comes on board. And eventually, if all goes as planned, there's a return at the end. And that is oftentimes a lot of people's goals for being entrepreneurs. But I would argue that the end result really should not be what you're thinking about. It should be about the process of your approach and practice to that initial commitment to the concept or idea that you're building. Now, this is all seemingly sounding very abstract. So, I want to tie it to examples whenever I can. But before I kind of go down a route with that, maybe if there are any questions that you have now, send them right into the chat or into the Q&A. I'm really open, and I usually am one of the people doing the question asking. I love asking questions, and I believe strongly that there's no bad question, even if it's obvious. Sometimes that obviousness can be insightful for a group. So let me know what you think. And okay, great. We have one even in here.
Yep.
From Heidi. Hi, Heidi. So Heidi writes, I imagine as you move up to a higher level or move on to become an entrepreneur, you are going to spend less time on the day-to-day design tasks. I agree with this wholeheartedly. And Heidi's question is, what are the most important skills that an employee in design should gather as he or she is thinking about becoming an entrepreneur? So this is a great question, right? Moving away from an assignment-based approach to a exploratory and speculative approach, right? And as you are fulfilling assignments and building your career, you're modeling a way of thinking about the world that sometimes is not super helpful when you encounter higher level unstructured problems. Oftentimes, there's not necessarily a clear assignment, a clear priority. There might be difference of opinions. And the best way around this, and one of the activities that you have to become very comfortable with in this gray area, is in really absorbing information from your customer or user or community of stakeholders that you're building for. And so a lot of those priority activities are in creating the mechanism in order to absorb that information from your community of customers and users. And that can be really challenging, right? And you can think, okay, we've got to get this right. We're taking a lot of risk. We, want to make sure everything is perfect before we reach out to the world and gather feedback, because we don't want anybody to think we don't know what we're doing. And that's actually counterproductive. The real important piece at the level of the risk-taking that you undertake and the transition from the assignment-based approach is in defining the questions that you're asking. What are the greatest areas of uncertainty around your product or service or system or startup? And how can you reduce the time to gain that valuable knowledge? And what ultimately is the case is that knowledge may not exist within your team. It may not exist even within your group of mentors or advisors, but it definitely exists in the world of customers and users. And so your challenge becomes advocating for that customer and user centric approach, the underpinnings of human-centered design, and not just doing that once, not just saying, hey, we ran, an A/B hypothesis test and we got this result and now we're good to go. But it's continuing to reassess your assumptions about your customer and the market, and not acting on assumption, but acting on direct feedback and data from your community. And sometimes that might be really hard to get. Sometimes that might actually be the biggest task, is in developing that feedback mechanism. And everybody talks about the build, test, learn, the lean model, the fail fast program. And I think what's critical in that approach is not actually the failing fast, it's the continuing feedback and making sure there is a mechanism for that. And you can see the companies that have gone down a route of not surviving are often ones that are losing their feedback loop. They're no longer actually sensing what the market is really telling them, and they're saying, oh, we know best. And Sears is a great example of that, with a catalog delivery service that was very similar to what Amazon currently offers, that they didn't really properly invest in or care for or continue to iterate on. So that's again, it's a kind of a big picture look at that. I see, and then maybe another question. No,
Yeah.
that's Heidi's here.
So,
Is there
Robbie,
another one, Beth?
Yeah, we do have actually a question that came in through the chat. And Alex asks if you could talk about what resources are available in venues that may be helpful for design entrepreneurs in the Pasadena area.
Great. So, well, we are right in one right now. So Innovate Pasadena is built upon that mission of providing access in a lot of different areas to integrating design, business, and technology from an entrepreneurship perspective. And I think this is a great, really, really great place to start. Maybe in expanding beyond that, in Pasadena, Art Center is also one of these resources, and we offer a whole range of classes in our extension program, things that we would offer to our degree students that we make available to students coming from professional backgrounds, continuing education. And there are definitely classes there that you could participate in. And then there's the broader networks that we're connected to. But actually, before I even get to that, one other key piece, I'm lucky to be a member of the Caltech Entrepreneurs Forum and the planning committee. And that forum is also a great place to connect and learn and really circle around the Pasadena network. So slightly expanding beyond that, I think there's a community that I'm very close to and occasionally serve as faculty for, called Creative Startups. And they really work on behalf of the global community of creative entrepreneurs, helping them understand how to build businesses around their creative concepts. And then one of the most recent, it's not that recent actually, it's like 5 years old or 4 years old, but there's a podcast and a community that's powered by the company Envision called Design Better. And it's a really useful set of exercises around design at entrepreneurship and enterprise scale. So they interview people like, founder of Airbnb, people like Seth Godin, who runs the Alt MBA, which is another great resource. And then last shout out would be probably to Minnie Ingersoll's podcast, the LA Venture podcast. This is really widely about the community of entrepreneurship and investing, but in her incredible archive of interviews, there's a lot of knowledge sharing about resources and support. you can look at organizations and communities like Techstars, Grid 110, Pixel Exchange. There's many that are in and around Pasadena and downtown LA. And you feel free to reach out, and if there's any of those that you need more information on, I can follow up accordingly.
So Robbie, we did have another question that was submitted through chat actually, and an anonymous attendee asks, is pricing your work as a design entrepreneur similar to pricing as if you're a freelance designer?
That's a good question. And I think, so the annoying answer is that the price is defined by what a customer is willing to pay. And that's broadly, a kind of a mechanism of really testing what your competition might charge or what the existing status quo might be. I think the difference is really in that with the freelance or agency approach, you're billing upfront, whereas with the entrepreneur approach, you're investing. So instead of getting paid right away for the hours that you offer to solve a problem for a client, you're investing that pay, which theoretically your company would be paying you. So you're the founder of your company and you're paying yourself as the CEO. You're putting that money back in to the organization. So in a way, the pricing of that is contingent on both the market and the value you're creating, right? So there's a difference in price point between a full stack engineer and a front end developer. And you can really begin to understand how you create value by pricing out your activities. So say you're a founder and you're a full stack developer and you're wearing the CEO hat and the full stack developer hat. Well, you're going to be paying yourself the rate of the a standard full stack developer, but that money is not going into your pocket. That money is going into equity in the company. And you might say, hey, I'm going to only pay 50% of what I would be charging in the market rate in order to be able to justify the initial investment that I need to make in the company. And a lot of the ways you think about that is just in terms of the actual jobs that are being done, right? So you're as a CEO, you're doing lots of different jobs, and some of those jobs you can outsource for a cost, and maybe you want to think about that pricing as a way of understanding the value. What would a company that does that as a professional service charge? And then also, how much are you willing to risk in not compensating yourself, but putting that time into the company? So if you need cash, being an entrepreneur, to start a scalable venture-backed company is not necessarily the best path, because cash may not actually come out of the system for a little while. Whereas as a freelancer or as a project-based, assignment-based worker, you'll be paid at least hopefully within 30 days in the terms of your agreement. So I hope that's helpful. I don't know if that, to the anonymous person, that really helped you answer your question. I also think, like, particularly in the creative community, I think the engineering community is much better at this. In the creative community, we have we feel like we're lucky to just be creative, and therefore we don't necessarily charge the appropriate amount of money for our services, because we feel that it's a privilege to be, working in a creative industry. And I think we have to throw that out the door, because it's now not just a unique subsector of the economy, but in fact, 1 in 7 jobs in the LA region, according to the Otis report on the creative economy, is just that, is a creative economy position. So it's standardized, it's an industry, and charging what you need to make is important, not just what the client might think they want to pay.
That's good advice. So I know that we're a couple minutes away from 12:30 here. And if anyone has any last minute questions, please feel free to type it in the Q&A for Robbie. But I was curious because, one of the things that Innovate Pasadena does well is help connect all of these different resources and institutions in the Pasadena area to help folks. We feel like that's what spawns true innovation. And, I see that you also, one of the things you do well is connecting designers and engineers and scientists and investors to help them launch new ventures. So my question to you is, do you have any tricks or tips on how you get these folks from different disciplines to work together and collaborate towards a common goal?
That's absolutely the hardest thing, and an area that I've been spending a lot of time. And one of the challenges in seeding that collaborative platform, a place where people really are comfortable in coming together and discussing cross-disciplinary collaborations, is that the education and training in those vastly different areas creates a lot of bias. And this disciplinary bias is not just in the right way or the wrong way or opinions, but it's actually even in the language that people use to define a problem or an opportunity or a market or an activity that they're going through. So helping people level set the language and understanding that somebody with a background in business might be talking about a economic principle, whereas somebody coming from an engineering background might be talking about a scientific principle, say physics, helping them see that their way of looking at it is not only that way, that they may be saying a very similar thing. And I think one of the activities that we've been pushing out to the world, and in a partnership frame with Design Lab, is an event series called Prototyping the Prototype. And the goal of that was to really look at how teams come together to solve problems and what the language of prototyping is in the distinct business, design, and engineering communities. And we run through a kind of set of fun activities that allow the participants to see their bias and to really not so much think about it as a bias in a negative way, but as a bias in a practical way. This is what I mean when I say market discovery, and this is what a designer means when they say, user experience, right? There may be actually huge amounts of overlap, but unless there's a vehicle to help people see those, then they end up sort of going back into their requisite silos. So Art Center and Innovate Pasadena and a community that I work also very closely with in Massachusetts called VentureWell, who really supports engineering, entrepreneurship, and invention. All of this work is sort of the next stage of that type of interdisciplinary entrepreneurship. So we're right at the forefront of that in Pasadena, and I'm really excited for the pandemic to end and to get back in the room and to be able to run more of these types of interdisciplinary activities with you all. And I think we will really see a kind of a much more rapid collaborative fabric being built. And that's what I hope to spend my time doing. So it's a great question, Beth. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today and sharing your time, of course. And if just, as a last minute shout out to everybody, how can people get in touch with you if they have a question or they want to find out more about, extending their learning through Art Center or, just entrepreneurship and the marriage of design?
Yes. So I'll put my email into the chat. You can definitely reach out to me at my Art Center email, which is also published, I believe, on ArtCenter's website, and then my LinkedIn. I really enjoy LinkedIn. I'm not always as fast to the response with it, but I do get back to everybody that gets in touch, and I try to put stuff out there when I can that speaks to this space. So, oh, and you know, the with Art Center, I can connect you to anybody else in our network that you may be interested in following up with. So if it's a class or Art Center extension or somebody else in our network, I would be very, very happy to make the connection. And I see just some amazing Art Center people in the audience, Milka and Cosme and Jose. So thank you for being here. You guys are awesome. And yeah, so I think that's the best way. I have an Instagram account, which is really my photography practice. So you can follow me there, but it's not this stuff. It's more of a kind of longer term exploration of digital photography, which I used to do as my day job. And that's how I learned about all the freelance related stuff. So yeah, stay in touch. And
Great.
keep a speed with Innovate Pasadena, because so much is on the horizon.
Thank you so much for joining us. And again, to everybody in the audience, follow Innovate Pasadena on YouTube. This Ask Me Anything, along with our entire Ask Me Anything series, will be published there. And soon we'll also be publishing transcripts of the various conversations on Medium. So follow us, follow Robbie, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.